Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You've looked at one of your houseplants and it's infested with pests. Or you've looked at one of your houseplants and it's looking like there might be something wrong with it. The leaves are going slightly black. It's not looking quite as healthy as it should. Are you prepared to give your plants the best care possible in order to help them bounce back? Stick with me and let's dive into creating your very own plant clinic. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So for today's video I thought let's do something fun, or at least I think it's fun. My kind of semi-demi medical background is singing with joy at the moment. And I thought what better time to do it coming off the back of what is the festive season where we've maybe got a bit more time to get everything ready in order to set ourselves up for success in the next growing year. So you might be asking, what is a plant clinic? Some of you, it might be self-explanatory, but for everybody else, the way that I envision this plant clinic to work is, say you've got a plant that is riddled with pests, or a plant that is struggling. It might be root rot, it might be too much light, it might not be enough humidity. This is going to be an area, and we'll talk about how maybe to set up this area, that is best suited in order to rehab plants. I know certain people might have areas where they go to isolate and quarantine their plants, but I'm thinking more holistically for this, somewhere where you can go where a lot of these things could happen at the same time, and being prepared. And in my opinion, being prepared is half the battle. If you've already got everything that you're going to need in order to deal with all the different scenarios, and hopefully what that might mean is if something does happen, you don't have to stress out and be in blind panic of trying to get everything organized to help rehab or to help nurse a certain plant back to health. The concept of the plant clinic will also help you have a very dedicated space somewhere around your house or around where your collection might be that is predominantly meant to be just that. It's meant to be a clinic where plants can go to and start to rehab and get back to their previous kind of glorious selves. So let's dive into clinic setup. And your clinic might look like a plethora of things. It depends on what you've got available. None of this video hopefully will be me saying you need to get this and get this and get this. Hopefully some of these things you might already have. If not, you could potentially come up with some alternatives, and I'll talk about some of them as we go through. So the actual clinic itself, it could look like several different things. So for some people, it might be something like a big clear container. I'm going to use a short propagation box as an example. However, what I might say is maybe if you don't already have it and you want to get something, this might be the one thing that I do suggest maybe you look into. Get something that's as tall as possible. The reason I'm saying this is because if you've got plants that you're rehabbing that are relatively tall, you're going to want as much height as you possibly can. You don't have to have this, and I'll talk about some other options now. So if you are one of the people that has got one of the IKEA glass cabinets, and I know some people are still using them, some people are not using them, or they're kind of transitioning smaller plants out of it, you could potentially repurpose something like a glass cabinet for that purpose. Another way that you could potentially do this, and this could be from thrift stores, or it could be secondhand or freebies on something like Facebook Marketplace, is to get something like an old aquarium or an old kind of reptile tank, because usually those are relatively sizable and they're made out of glass. It might mean that you might need to go and pick one up, but it will either be for very little or for free. Something else that you could potentially also try if you don't want to go through any of this hassle, arguably this option might be a bit more of a faff to kind of get going, because it means that you're going to have to set it up every time. And what I'm hoping to kind of achieve by something like a plant clinic is you don't even need to think about it. It's there. You can deal with it relatively quickly and not have to worry about kind of, oh, I need to do this and I need to do this and I need to do this. Could be something like what you might get. I don't know a better word for it, but there's some large, very deep plastic bags which tend to be for shipping kind of fish, usually with the water and everything. So those tend to be quite robust and they tend to be quite large in size. I used to have them. They moved with me somewhere in the house, moved, and they are somewhere in the house, but I lost track of where they might be. But hopefully you're understanding what I'm talking about. If not, I'll see if I'm about adding pictures or videos or something just so you've got an idea. Failing that, if you don't have that, you might have some clear plastic bags hanging around somewhere. That could be another option, but you can see what I mean by that. That is going to require some setup, whilst the other options, because they're already existing boxy clear things, essentially, you don't have to set anything up. Now, there's certain things that you need to consider about where you're going to place this clinic. And for all intents and purposes, I am going to talk about it as if it was a big clear box, whether it's a propagation bin, it could be the IKEA cabinet, it could be a terrarium, anything like that. So first thing is you're going to need the space to put it. That might be a challenge for some of us. Too many plants, not enough space. But finding a space to have it is a good idea. And again, depending on what you've got, if you're one of these people that has got plenty of grow lights and you've got ones that you're maybe not using as much as you were previously and they're kind of sitting there somewhere collecting dust, time to reuse. If you don't, then one of the things you're going to need to consider is where you're going to put the clinic needs to be somewhere where it's going to get light. Even if you can't get it near a window because everything is kind of already taking space on a window, then you could find a space near something like a lamp or anything like that, and you could place it underneath there. The light might be less than ideal, but at least it's somewhere that might be further away, might be somewhere that's tucked away, so you don't have to kind of look at this every day, day in and day out. But if you do have something like grow lights, then the world's your oyster. You're not limited by finding somewhere to put it near a lamp or even near a window. You can bury it away somewhere that nobody else can see, as long as it's got that grow light there. And in an ideal world, it's good if your grow light, if you're going to be using something like a grow light, you can kind of tweak it up or down in terms of light levels. And I do have one that I can show you here, and that is one that you don't have to get if you don't want to spend any money on a grow light. I have found that it's very good in terms of dimming things up and down, basically. But most grow lights, there are ways of dimming them. If not, and it's just a bulb, sometimes you could get something as a simple dimmer to attach to the lamp, and you can kind of do it that way, basically. But the reason why I'm saying this is you might have plants that are struggling because of light levels, maybe too much light or too little light. You want to be able to control that, because remember, what we're not doing is just having a quarantine section somewhere just so you can deal with pests. This is going to cover a whole host of things. So obviously something to consider is going to be the light, like we've just discussed. Space, these things are going to be a big potentially, so somewhere that you can place it. And temperature. Please try not to put it somewhere where it's arctically cold, like a very cold and not well insulated garage, because you're kind of defeating some of the purpose there. You might end up stressing the plants that you're trying to help in the clinic more by having them in a cold location. Somewhere that would have ambient household conditions would be great. I am not talking about humidity with this one, because if we are using something like a clear boxy thing, even the bags, the humidity is still going to be within there, and you're essentially creating kind of almost like a mini terrarium around these plants, so you don't have to worry about the humidity element, at least. So one of the things that you might want to consider is tools, and again, this is where preparation is going to be your friend. So a couple of things that I have. You don't have to have all of these things. You might have your own versions of this, but just to give you some inspiration. It might sound ridiculous, and I thoroughly enjoyed creating the thumbnail for this video because I finally got to reuse masks and gloves again. Something like a mask I am sure there's plenty of us that have got masks lying around that are not being used at the moment. So something like that could potentially work if you're really worried about things like powdery pesticides or anything like that, or even if your plants that you're going to be dealing with have got something like mold or mildew on them and you don't necessarily want to be breathing them, especially if you've got breathing issues. I don't know whether or not the standard masks that we were all using for COVID are going to block it necessarily, but they're better than nothing, basically. So some form of face covering if you want it. Then something like rubber gloves. Again, COVID. I'm sure we've all got some of these lying around somewhere, basically. Don't go out and buy them if you don't have them. Kitchen rubber gloves will do just fine, basically. But the reason why I'm saying that again is you might not want to be getting some pesticides, especially if you're not going to be using organic pesticides and you're going to be using something like systemics or even, again, something like spores from funguses and things like that you might not want to be breathing if your plant is suffering from that. Gloves are a good thing, not just, I was talking about breathing like I'm talking about the mask still, but things you don't necessarily want to get into contact with your skin. It's always a good idea. If you've got them, you don't necessarily have to. As I said, these are just ideas. The next thing is something, and I've got a fancy thing because I've been a fan of Jane Perrone and On the Ledge podcast for way too long, and she's kind of the one that kind of mentioned something like this. I've got something called a jeweler's loop, and I'll bring it in so you might be able to see, and it's just a couple of magnifying glasses. I think the battery on this might be dead now. Yeah, it is dead. So there are two lights there, and there is a battery that you can put on there, and basically what that will do is it will shine a light down onto whatever you're trying to magnify. You can have a regular magnifying glass, or if you don't have this, your phone in a pinch will do just fine. If it's got a semi-decent zoom, that will be enough to kind of get there, because again, you might want to be looking at things at a very kind of close level, especially thinking about things like spider mites or some other elements that might be happening. If it's edema and you're not entirely sure, it's a good thing to have readily available so you can just kind of quickly zoom in and go, oh yes, I think I know what it is. I can see clearly now. However bizarre it might sound, something like plant eyes. Most of us will have some form of plant eye around. It's a good idea to just have some of these things near this clinic area that you're going to have, because everything is going to be together. You might need to tie things up, especially depending on what it is that you might be dealing with. And then we're looking at a bunch of sprays. So, for instance, I'll run you through what some of these things are. This is my neem oil solution. This is my rubbing alcohol spray. This is just plain reverse osmosis water if I need to mist anything. And this, which is entirely empty, is my bottle of spray synthetic, basically. So you need to be able to distinguish between them, basically. What I'm saying is, if you've got bottles and they're all the same, label them so you know what is what, because you're going to forget about the clinic until you actually need it. The last thing you want to be doing is, I've got all of these things and I can't use them because I don't know what's what. I know because of colors, basically, and I've been using them and they're in my little clinic area generally, so I know what I need to be picking up when. One thing that unfortunately you probably won't want to have there, because it's something that you get reactively rather than proactively because they won't survive otherwise, is something like, especially if you're going to be going down the more necessarily organic but less chemically route, if you want to go for predatory insects. But what I will say is be prepared and know where to purchase them from, have an idea of what the costs might be or kind of the volumes that you might need at different times, because that's going to be something that if you're going to want to use, you're going to want to order as soon as you see a potential pest. This is predominantly going to be if you are treating a plant in the clinic for pests. Always a good idea, if you've got it, to have a bottle, and this is just a bottle that I've reused, which is just RO water, so reverse osmosis water. It could be distilled water, some water that is as pure as you can get it. If you're lucky enough to have a water butt in the garden and you've got rainwater, even better, use the rainwater, but it's always a good idea. I'm never a proponent of having to water all of your plants with distilled water, reverse osmosis water, even kind of rainwater, because it can be a hassle for a lot of people, especially depending on how many plants you do have. But having something like just a litre of it lying around somewhere could really help, depending on what you need to treat for a specific plant. And obviously, if you've got something like sphagnum moss or something like a bag of perlite somewhere, it could potentially help, especially if you're trying to rehab plants back from things like root rot. And talking about root rot, before I forget, something like a pair of scissors, or, and I'm not going to show it because YouTube gets funny, or a very sharp knife again. And again, these are all things that by all means do use them if you need to all the time. But if you're fortunate enough to have these that you can just leave where the clinic is going to be, basically, then everything is together. Then all you need to do is, oh, this plant has X issue. Let me take it to the clinic, deal with it there, place it in the clinic. Done. Takes a lot of the stress out of things. Also note how I did not add fertilizer to that list. You can if you want to, but a lot of the times, depending on the problem that you might be dealing with, fertilizing your plants when there's a huge pest issue, or fertilizing your plants where it's going through root rot potentially, or fertilizing your plants if it's going through something like a fungal infection, or fertilizing your plants when they're already exhibiting issues with kind of over nutrients, basically. So they're experiencing kind of maybe some chemical burn or even some sun stress. All of these things, if you then add into the mix something like a fertilizer, at least during the first few days or even weeks of rehabbing that plant, you're adding more stress onto it, which it really shouldn't be dealing with. So if you can, avoid fertilizing during that initial stage. Now let's talk about the actual care that you're going to give to your plants in the clinic. And this is the section where if you're using something like a clear box, you might want to have something like a divider, or maybe have more than one, basically. And the reason why I'm saying this, and I know this is kind of adding on top of things, is a lot of the times, depending on the issue that you might have, and this is where maybe the clear plastic bags might come in useful, you might need to be isolating things. So let me give you a very specific example. Say, for instance, this. So this is Anthurium forgetii that is currently, as you might be able to see, it's not very happy. It's struggling with root rot, and I've dealt with it in this situation. This is a plant which doesn't have it, but say, for instance, this plant had thrips currently. What you don't want to be doing is placing sphagnum moss in something like a propagation bin, taking this bare root with potentially some rot still on there, placing it in the propagation bin, doing the same with this plant, and then all that might end up happening is the root rot from here, the bacteria or the fungi that causes it, could then spread to the healthy roots of this plant, causing potentially some root rot on this as well. Again, there's a lot of other factors as well, things like airflow, things like the humidity in the boxes, in the clear boxes. And again, what I would say at this point is you might want to crack that box as often as you can, or the bag, open it up like maybe once a day for like a couple of minutes, or once every couple of days, just to get some new airflow coming in. But then also, if this plant has then got thrips, and these two are in the same box, remember we were talking about thrips, and I've got my top 5 favorite plants from thrips at the top that I can link there. They kind of can fly. Not very well, but they can fly. So what you don't want to be doing is introducing these two in exactly the same enclosed little space, because what you might be trying to achieve then is rehabbing both of these plants, and then they just end up infecting each other with whatever they've got. So it depends on what you want to do it and how involved you want to get with the clinic itself, basically. So for instance, I've got a large collection. So what I might do is have one clinic area, but there might be 3 large propagation bins, basically. One which I'm going to be dealing with pests, the other might be something like root issues, and the other might be for something else. It might be kind of light issues, basically. So what I want to be achieving with this is being able to isolate these plants within their little environments, within these little biomes essentially, and deal with whatever issue it is at that one particular time. I don't want to be putting everything in the same place. Granted, I have got a large collection. If you've got a smaller collection and you know that at any given time you're probably only going to be dealing with one issue, it might be one pest on one plant, or it might be one pest, or you might be experiencing a plethora of root rot in your plant, address what you are doing to potentially aggravate some of this root rot if it's happening on multiple plants. Same thing goes if you've got multiple pest issues. I know what my issue is with the pests, even though I treat them. All of my plants are too close to each other, so they walk around each other. Can't get around that because I haven't got the space. But what I'm saying is you might only need that one little clinic area if you don't have that many issues that you might be dealing with in tandem. I know myself too well, and I'm going to need to have 3 sections within the same clinic. And just to stretch this kind of example as far as it will go, it's like 3 different departments within a clinic, basically. So as long as they are kept separate, then you're fine, basically. What you can do is, if you've got the 3 different clinic areas, is you could make sure that each one of them has got whatever supplies it might need. So if you know that you struggle a lot with humidity issues or lighting issues, one clinic area or one clinic department might have what you need there. So it might have its own dedicated grow light next to it, or it might have a box that seals better than the other ones, just to make sure that that humidity is kept in. For another plant clinic section or department, if it's going to be for pest management, all the bottles that I was showing you a moment ago, they're going to need to be near that, basically. Same thing goes with the sphagnum moss, or even the perlite and the scissors and the alcohol. Basically, you want to maybe have that in the department that's going to be dealing with root rot. So it makes it nice and simple, and then you know, okay, I'm going to take this plant, it's struggling with this, I'm going to take it to this department of my clinic and deal with it there, basically. As I said, you don't have to have departments. The other way around this is, if you've got the bag situation, you might end up with quite a few different bags if you're dealing with a whole bunch of issues, but each one of those bags becomes its own kind of ward or kind of room at a clinic. I am stretching this example as far as it will go, but go with me. I am enjoying this like to no end. And then the other thing that you might want to do when you are caring for your plants in the clinic, and I would highly suggest that you do this, is have something like that you can label, or maybe even a notepad that's there. That's probably going to be the easiest way of doing it. A notepad and pen on paper or anything like that, and register things as they go in. Trust me, it seems like a really pedantic kind of step, but you will thank me later on when you're kind of looking back on this, because what you want to be doing is taking a note of when things are going in. So if you are kind of bringing a plant in because, say for instance, it's got root rot and you're hoping to deal with the root rot in the clinic, when this is coming in, jot down and say, okay, this is today's date, this plant, so the Anthurium forgetii, and this is the, ironically enough, this is the plant rescue box from Kaylee at the store, and this was a forgetii that had the smallest amount of roots, and I think this plant specifically, bless it, has had root rot 3 times now. My other forgetii, the one that I've had for a while, it's fine, but this one is still on the struggle bus. I'm still trying to fix it. But no shade to the Kaylee like rescue boxes. All the other plants are doing particularly well. I think this was entirely my fault, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. But say this one is something that I'm bringing in. I want to take down the date of the plant that it went in, what the issue was. I am a bit kind of obsessive about these things, so I might even take a picture of my phone, just having a look at the roots, and kind of mention that in the note that I've taken a picture on this date as well, because the reason why you're doing this is, at any given time, because we all lead busy lives, we might have multiple plants, we have other things that we're going to be focusing on. What I don't want to happen is 6 months down the line going, what was that plant that was in there? Because it might lose its leaf. It might just go back to a stump to then regrow back. And you're just thinking, what? What is that? What? I don't remember what I put in there because I never labeled anything. If you've got it written down, you'll know the date, you know what went in there, you know the reason. If you've taken a picture, you can also kind of look back at that picture. Specifically, when I'm saying picture, is I've kind of got more into the habit of doing this, and I'm actually really enjoying this because I can truly see the difference. Because 2 months down the line, 2 weeks down the line, I can look at that original picture and look at the plant and actually go, ooh, if I didn't have that picture, I might be going, not much is happening, but actually I can go, ooh, no, there is a difference. There is a noticeable difference comparing that picture to what it looks like now. So that's a good way of doing things. And essentially what you can do is then monitor your plants in this way. So if you've got that little kind of notepad and you've got everything jotted down, you can kind of see and deal with it as and when you need to, basically. You can see when you need to be checking things as well, because you can see, okay, this has been in for this long, I haven't checked on it in a while, let's see what's happening, basically. And then judge accordingly, because what that will give you very, very quickly, especially if you put dates down, is, I know on average, and you'd be surprised how much of plant care is same, and everything kind of happens in a similar kind of way, is okay, I know roughly going from no roots to at least some roots, that means I can bring it back into the collection after it maybe gone through root rot, has been 4 weeks. I've noticed in the plant clinic, because I've kept a record of it, that actually generally that's roughly how long things need to bounce back. Sweeping generalization, because different plants will bounce back at different stages and they might need longer or lesser time depending on the plant in itself. But just as a point of reference, basically, you can see, okay, you know what? Thrips that I was dealing with on this plant, and I've had it in this department of the clinic, that took on average 4 weeks. And roughly with a lot of the other plants, it might take 4 weeks. Check in on it again at 4 weeks. It might take 6, but at least you've got something that you can benchmark when you need to be checking. And there is the starker reality as well of clinic, because however bleak it might be, not everybody that goes into a clinic comes out of a clinic. So there is a point, especially if you've written notes down and kind of done everything that you need to do, you can rest easy in kind of saying, okay, I have done best possible care that I had for this specific plant. If it was going through this issue, it's now been 4 months, 6 months, there is no difference. Might be the time to pull the plug potentially for that one. So there is, I'm at that stage now of my plant collecting where I'm just like, I need to learn how to let go. And if you're seeing something in there for 6 months, it might have been too far gone with whatever issue it was dealing with for you to be able to bring it back, essentially. And it's a good place because at least it's isolated. Because what you don't see a lot of the times is as things deteriorate, especially if you leave them in their original place, is whatever they had wrong with them might end up spreading to the things around them. And you probably don't want to be dealing with one, you don't want to be dealing with like 20 casualties when you can just limit it down to the one. But again, it helps make that transitional period a bit easier. So in summary, basically, plant clinic means you don't have to stress. It might mean that you need to find a dedicated space in your area, but if it means that you can deal with things a lot faster and deal with them in a more efficient manner and a bit more systematic, then surely that will be a good thing. There is no one size fits all when it comes to clinics. You need to decide what is likely going to be most useful to you. You can have multiple departments. You can have the one department, all of these things. But certain things like being prepared with the materials that you're going to need, being prepared with like a notepad there, these are good things to have generally, because then it means you're not scrambling around trying to find it going, I've somehow got spider mites and I run out of neem 3 months ago, and then you're worried. And pests don't always spread that quickly for however much it gets us really panicky at times. But if it's a day or two until you get a new bit of neem oil to create a new solution, it's not going to be the end of the world. But at least if you've got something there and it's ready, it will help bring down that stress level to it ready, going, oh yeah, that's all I need to do is take it there, deal with it here, put it into its own clinic, and then check in on it, write that it basically write notes when it first went into the clinic, and then just check back on it when you need to, basically. It just makes it for a much more straightforward process. Yes, the reality, and you know that I do like to talk about warts and all, you're going to need to find a space to put this, and it's not going to be the most pretty thing to look at. If you are fortunate enough, and I'm fully aware I am talking from a place of privilege, not everybody has something like a conservatory, which you'd very rarely see the bottom shelves, but that's where a lot of these kind of more functional elements of plant care are happening. And it looks messy as all, but I've got it kind of like lower down, basically. But these things are good to have if you can dedicate a small space for them as well. However you decide to do it, whatever budget or no budget, if you want to do this as free as possible, reusing certain things, containers, things like that, do it your way. But hopefully this might mean that going into the new year, if you're watching this when I'm posting this, but it applies for all year round, basically, it means you don't have to worry about things, you're more prepared. But yeah, I'd be curious to see what you think of this as a topic, as a concept. It's something that I've already started to do with a lot of my collection. Do let me know in the comments down below if you're willing to try something like this, if you're doing something similar. If you can't do it, why can't you do it? What's potentially blocking that process basically from happening? But yeah, Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.